Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. Thank you so much for joining me. I apologize for the technical difficulties yesterday. I don't know what happened, and I hope we're not going to have a repeat about this today. But on the plus side, I was discussing things with Diane, and she and I figured out some other skills on YouTube. And so I'm hoping to provide you with a better visual experience with bringing in some clips and videos that I was able to figure out how to incorporate into this discussion. So for people who are unaware of the wokeacademy.info site that I have set up, www.wokeacademy.info, I have a post which I developed on this particular subject, which is about UBC and the tip of the spear, which I wanted to share with you. And I was talking about this yesterday, but I did not get a chance to go into it in any detail because I was very worried about people not understanding me because of all the technical difficulties. Anyway, at the wokeacademy.info site, there's a number of posts. This is the latest one, and it's going to be it's talking about the situation of the University of British Columbia. And if anyone is experiencing any technical difficulties, please let me know if there's anything going wrong, and I'll try. I don't know what I can do to fix it, but at least I'll be aware of that and try to get into that, try to figure it out after the fact. But with respect to the University of British Columbia, as I mentioned yesterday, I was a student at University of British Columbia for 2 years between 1985 and 1987. And I found it to be a very, very rigorous institution. And unfortunately, in a number of areas now, this is not the case. And this is a very sad state of affairs that one of our most prestigious universities in Canada is engaged in so much propagandizing to faculty, students, and the public. And therefore, I want to go into the University of British Columbia to encourage that institution to assume a more academic path. And a number of people have been saying to me on social media, well, I hope you've booked space at the University of British Columbia. And I don't have to book space to go and have discussions with people. This is what a university is about. And if I'm going to cater to that kind of mentality, it is accepting that University of British Columbia is no longer a university that values open inquiry. So I'm just going in there. It's not an event. I am going to just be starting off at the Indian Residential School History and what's called Dialogue Center, which is a terrible propagandistic institution on the campus. And I don't have to be there. I can move somewhere else if this is not where I should be. I'm happy to take up any space just having discussion. So I don't need a microphone. I don't need a table to have any merchandise. I don't need a sound system. I'm just there to contest the falsehoods that the University of British Columbia has been disseminating for the last 4.5 years. And if the University of British Columbia wants to follow the path of the University of Victoria, so be it, but I will hold you to account for that. I will go hard on you, and I will explain to the public the falsehoods that you've been perpetuating, and this is an embarrassment for a supposedly prestigious university. But I'm not expecting any of that because I think that University of British Columbia is more of an academic environment than the University of Victoria. So, but we'll see. I'm not afraid of any kind of consequences which are going to be. I'm doing nothing wrong. I have nothing to apologize for. However, there's a number of other people who have been doing some, seriously problematic things and having a negative impact on their institution. Anyway, so Thursday, January 22nd, 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific, we're going to be going in to the University of British Columbia. And I would like to encourage everyone who is watching this, please come to the University of British Columbia on this date, because there's a number of activists who have taken over the University of Victoria, and they were able to mobilize people in a very short space of time. 7 faculty members were involved, and they got hundreds of people. And if we aren't able to mobilize rational thinkers, it's going to make the University of British Columbia see that, or think that, people don't value open inquiry and critical thinking anymore. So, and we want them to understand that if they don't, if they don't open up their institution to evidence and the ability to self-correct, then they are going to suffer serious reputational damage. So that's got to be the message that the University of British Columbia receives. So please come out. I'm looking forward to having these discussions, and people obviously don't have to agree with me. Like, everyone can contest what it is I'm arguing, but what is unacceptable is using the heckler's veto, trying to stop people from saying anything. And if you bring your drums, that doesn't bother me. I'm super nanny, and I can outlast any toddler who's having a temper tantrum. I will just continue to take you back on the naughty spot. I will continue to make the arguments. I'm not going to rise to any of the bait. You can call me any name in the book. I do not care, because I know that is a tactic to avoid addressing the arguments. So Tom Flanagan on December 16th said that he described me as the sharp end of the spear. And I think that is a correct type of analogy to make, because I am going to, with my determination, I'm going to pierce through the nonsense at the University of British Columbia. And you can watch that video with Drea Humphrey, interview with Drea Humphrey and Tom Flanagan. I believe it starts at 14:22. And just so that you can click on these
Dead wrong. How Canada got the residential school story so wrong. It's the name of a new book that's reaching some of the top charts in Amazon, and it's the sequel to a book that many of you have already read. That is none other than Grave Error: How the Media Misled Us and the Truth.
I just want to try to advance it here so we don't have to listen to all that. Drea Humphrey is talking about this UVic situation.
Making a big deal about it, but for the most
there's a
little
bit of clips
they are at large ignoring it or avoiding saying its name, which I'm also not surprised to see. But I encourage viewers who are watching this to also check that out, in addition with Dead Wrong. Last question I want to ask you. Recently, I've been covering some of Dr. Frances Widdowson, of her, her efforts to just see what the state of debate and free speech is at universities. And it has been wild. It has been an in-your-face depiction of what has been happening here, like the back of your book says, where it says, the 215 unmarked graves shows just how easily people will adopt something because the culture says so, whether it's true or not. So when I see these young adults at universities so passionate about defending the lie, it's heartbreaking. It must be for you as a professor. How do we get out of this mess? You're doing what you can with the book, but is there any other advice you have about breaking through the echo chamber so more know the truth on our own history?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Frances. She's I would call it the sharp end of the spear.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the Drea Humphrey interview, which you can click on in the wokeacademy.info site. You can also watch it on YouTube. And anyway, so I hope that came through. The sound, I hope that the sound was okay in terms of watching that that discussion. Let me know in the chat if it's not, because I'm just trying to add a little bit more interesting things to the program here. Okay, so in terms of the Kamloops case, and that's all I am interested in right now, is the Kamloops situation. We need to have the truth about Kamloops. And what we're seeing, as we'll see shortly, is distortion of history that's going on. And you see this from the press release, is that the Kamloops Band did not talk about potential graves. It talked about the confirmation of the remains of 215 children who were students at the school, and that some were as young as 3 years old. So for people who are trying to say that the Kamloops Band never said this, it said potential graves, and the media just jumped to conclusions. This is a falsehood that a number of people are now perpetuating with respect to this area. And we want to get the truth about this. There's no evidence to put forward this perspective, as I've documented in many other videos. But our focus here is on the University of British Columbia. And University of British Columbia is important because it is a prestigious institution, and it has been perpetuating this falsehood since 2021. And when people at UBC talk, the public listens, because I think there is some legitimacy as to what is being put forward. And there's 3 major areas at UBC that have serious problems and are basically the tail that is wagging the dog with respect to perpetuating this falsehood. And these are the First Nations. Number 1, the First Nations House of Learning. And you can see that is Jolie Viveros is in that area. The Residential School History and Dialogue Center, which has the academic director, is a person by the name of Johnny Mack. And then we have the Archaeology and Anthropology departments. Andrew Martindale, who's a professor, an archaeologist, I believe, and he has done an article with Brian Whiting, and Brian Whiting is involved as well in terms of providing the academic backing for the falsehood of the remains of 215 children being confirmed at the Kamloops Senior Residential School. And that has to do with GPR. Okay, so I hope the technology is working. Seems like it is. So this is excellent. Let's take a look at the UBC First Nations House of Learning. And so I did a video about this a few months ago, I guess, because of Jolie Viveros. And I'll just start this video, see what happens. And I think hello everyone, 33, Francis Widdowson, First Nation 2024, fronting.info website. Just want to advance it if I can. Anyway, this residential school denialism confrontation that was going on had a woman by the name of Jolie Viveros introduce the presenters. And I just recently became exposed to Jolie again when I posted a clip from Sarah Bollier on X, and it was about Sarah Bollier's presentation. It was a short clip about Sarah Bollier saying that the reason why they scanned the apple orchard was because, quote unquote, knowledge keepers had said that children, 6-year-olds were woken up in the middle of the night to dig burials in the apple orchard, which is a very implausible claim in its own right. But this resulted in this GPR scan. Anyway, I was kind of questioning the veracity of this claim, and lo and behold, Jolie took me to task for this and said, basically implied that I had been fired from Mount Royal University because I don't understand the truth or recognize evidence. And then she argued that knowledge keepers are eyewitnesses, and eyewitnesses are used in court. And so why do I have a problem with this? And this led me to reply to Jolie, look up some documents whereby I found that UBC has been making all sorts of claims about clandestine burials. So I want to know, this is on the UBC website, what clandestine burials are we talking about? And I posted this back at Jolie, and she posted another irate message about how you don't have to excavate to know that there are remains in various places. And this was callous of me to be demanding that, the children be disturbed, these kinds of posts. And when I tried to reply to Jolie, I discovered that she had blocked me. Okay, so that gives one a bit of an understanding of Jolie Viveros, which she is the director of the First Nations House of Learning. She has interactions with Andrew Martindale. There was an event that she held with Andrew Martindale and Sean Carlton about confronting residential school denialism that was held at UBC. And so there's all these interconnections between these different figures who are trying to shut down discussion on the grave error that's been made with respect to the Kamloops case. So that's the first institution, and you can watch that entire video that describes what it is that Jolie Viveros has been up to over the last few years. The second institution is the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center, and this is run by a law professor whose name is Johnny Mack, and he has been involved in the perpetuating of falsehoods with respect to the Kamloops case because he made a statement after the meltdown that happened at the University of Victoria. And this is, he said in response to this, that, how hurtful it was that this had happened. And although UBC has not been directly targeted, many of our community are feeling the strain. Well, you are targeted now, University of British Columbia, because this is totally unacceptable to have a quote unquote academic director in this position, which is supposed to be a dialogue center. And of course, there's no dialogue. It is a monologue. In order to have dialogue, you need two people. And that's not happening here. Anyway, he says, Johnny Mack, the history of the Indian residential school system does not require debate. It is established through the voices of survivors, through government and church records, and through the extensive finding of the national commissions and inquiries, and then Indigenous communities who have carried these truths across generations. You don't carry truths across generations. Well, first of all, it's plural, so that gives us a bit of a heads up about that situation. Truth is objective. It is a universal. There's no such thing as truths, plural. There is truth and there is falsity. There is not something called truths. Anyway, this is the kind of postmodernist, relativistic nonsense that people like Johnny Mack are disseminating and intimidating anyone who is trying to question them. Anyway, yeah, that's correct. Carried truths are hearsay, which is inadmissible. Oh, I've heard that there's different degrees of reliability with respect to hearsay, but it certainly should be tested, which is, of course, doesn't happen in this case. moving on. So we had the First Nations House of Learning with Jolie Viveros, the Indian Residential School History and Monologue Center. I'm renaming that. And then we have a more serious situation, which is the contamination of the academic curriculum in archaeology and anthropology at the University of British Columbia. And this is happening largely in the anthropology department. And one of the key figures in this regard is Andrew Martindale. And I just wanted to play this part of this clip of Martindale. This is Martindale's work with respect to Cooper Island.
The march landed on the same day the tribe released findings of archival records related to 171 deaths at Cooper Island Residential School, 50 more than what is posted at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation.
And we have identified 342 unmarked graves. 111 of these are possible graves, 133 probable, and 98 are likely.
At 2 other locations around the
Now, I hope that people were able to detect that illogic. Andrew Martindale, as I've indicated here, said that we have identified 342 unmarked graves. He then goes on to say 111 of these are possible graves, 133 probable, and 98 are likely. So unmarked graves is certainty that you found graves. And then you have the words possible, probable, and likely. So those things are inconsistent. And then you have the bizarre thing of this different words being used. Possible, probable, and likely. And that raises the question, how do you know whether a grave is possible or probable? Like the difference between that. And how does GPR tell you about that? So that's an amazing thing. And he is an archaeology or anthropology professor, I guess. He's an archaeologist, but he's in anthropology. So this is the kind of information that University of British Columbia is giving legitimacy towards. And then we have something even more disturbing, which is the Cooper Island situation. So this to do with the Cooper Island situation and the podcast that was done. So, and this podcast was in 2022, where Andrew Martindale was talking to Duncan McHugh, who is a CBC journalist. And this is on the CBC website, but I just have a clip here which I wanted to play for you, and I wanted to start it at 1:39, and it's about what an elder by the name of Monty Charlie told him.
So, according to researchers who've combed through what records...
39 here. Sorry, I got to move it forward.
He also brought me here. That's an apple tree. It's just growing out of a stump. The old apple tree was very large. And he said there's a girl from the school who was buried at the foot of the apple tree. Then we just laid out the grids, and really our equipment is not particularly contemporary, so it doesn't have a display that compiles the data for us. We take that back. It wasn't for several days until I looked at the grid that I realized and visualized the data that there was the burial. He didn't tell me her name, unfortunately, or anything of her story, but he did tell me where she was buried.
Okay, so this is in 2022, so this is after the Kamloops case. Martindale is doing GPR work at Cooper Island, and you might have noticed he says visualize the data as a burial of a human burial. That's not how GPR works. So he is misleading the public there on this broadcast. I have had interactions with 2 geoscience experts. They say you don't visualize that data, you have a sort of an impression that the more that the extensive the response, like you can see whether it's faint or whether it's got a very, very reactive kind of response. If it's very reactive, it's about the difference in densities. And so it's often something like a metal pipe if you see a very, very strong reaction from the GPR, but you don't know until you excavate. The other thing you might have noticed is that Andrew Martindale talks about that Monty Charlie he told him that there's a child buried there, but he didn't tell him any other aspects of the story. And this is changed. This position of Martindale changes on August 4th, 2025, when he told the journalist Michael John Lowe that that a survivor once witnessed a nun bury the body of a child. This was not mentioned at all in 2022. And he says that the late Monty Charlie once saw a nun kill a young girl by pushing her out a third floor window at the school. That never was said in 2022. And Charlie had died before the 2022 broadcast. So it couldn't have been Charlie changing his story. Somehow Martindale changed his story in the absence of Monty Charlie's views being expressed. So this is a serious thing that's happened here. An accusation of murder that Martindale is making here to a journalist, and if we had the media that was functioning, questions would be asked. But of course, the journalists don't do this anymore. But University of British Columbia, I am alerting you to this situation, a very, very serious situation, which should be rectified. And we can rectify it if we have open inquiry on your campus. Okay, so that's something that's important. Carrying on with archaeology, also related to Andrew Martindale, is an associate of his, which is Brian Whiting. There's a peer review article that Whiting wrote, and I've linked it here, and it's open access. So you can just go into it, and it's basically community-led investigations of unmarked graves at Indian residential schools in Western Canada, overview, status report, and best practices. And as we're going to see, best practices are community-led. And that's a very serious problem, because the community leading means that they control the research. And that's what happened at Kamloops. It's the same thing with the archaeology department at Simon Fraser University, is that the archaeology department there is under a gag order from the Kamloops Indian Band. It was a lawyer. It was George Nicholas who, the archaeologist, let this be known. Anyway, this Brian Whiting leads a geoscience firm, as you can see here, Geoscan Subsurface Surveys, but he's also got his Department of Anthropology, University of British Columbia designation too, and he provides an email address, in fact, from the University of British Columbia in this article. So that's the beginning of the article with the abstract. And he acknowledges Andrew Martindale. And there's also a BC Technical Working Group, which is about unmarked graves. And that shows you a little bit of advocacy that's in that entity. And then finally, on page 13 of this article, we get to the kicker, which is, showing all the steps, and there's all these kinds of things, like you've got to have counseling, of course, to help people deal with this, the terrible thing that is going to be found. So that's kind of a priming approach where you get people to imagine this terrible thing that they're going to discover. You go through all these steps, you do the scans, and then you come to this part here where you'll notice here, it says excavate, yes or no. And if you do excavate, you perform DNA. Now that's jumping the gun, of course, because you don't know you're going to have to perform DNA analysis unless you find bodies, which you're not sure if you are, because you've got to excavate to determine that. But even worse is when it's no, you mark and memorialize the graves. Okay, and this is the kind of terrible situation that's going on at the University of British Columbia. So there we have it. University of British Columbia, very prestigious university. We have these two advocacy entities, the UBC First Nations House of Learning, which has Jolie Viveros at the head. And if you just look at the website for that entity, it's incredible because they have all this staff on it. And John Kay did some, investigation into it. And they're all claiming that they're uninvited guests on the lands of Aboriginal groups. And so being uninvited, you should just not be there anymore if you're uninvited. This is kind of a ridiculous thing to say. And then we have the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center, which is, of course, not a dialogue center because they don't allow oppositional points of view to be expressed. And that is a very dangerous thing because that's how you pursue the truth, is that you have to hold your ideas up to what Mark Mercer calls, this is former president of Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, he called it disputation. So universities should be areas of disputation where you hold ideas up to challenge. And this is not happening in either of those. But this is what happened in these institutions historically, as we would get these advocacy entities in place. And you would say, it's not affecting the curriculum. It's just, it's this kind of side thing. They do their thing. They're not interfering with the academic side. But what we're seeing is that these advocacy entities, because they're so aggressive and they insult anyone who challenges them, they're the tail wagging the dog. And that's why you see all this kind of terrible things in archaeology and anthropology, which is, of course, this is the academic side. And if we're wondering why Kamloops, the grave area at Kamloops has been able to be perpetuated for 4.5 years, it's because the academic side is so badly contaminated. And that's the case for archaeology and anthropology at University of British Columbia. So I think that what we're going to be doing on January the 22nd is incredibly important. I can't overstress its importance because the university is failing. And if you try and book space, you're going to be canceled because that's happened numerous times before at University of British Columbia. You try and go in without booking the space because you don't have space that you need to book. You're just out in the open air, not making any demands off of the university, not getting them to change anything for you. And then they bring in the police to have you removed. So UBC, it was, I think it was a number of days after I was arrested at the University of Victoria. They had a pro-Palestinian protest that shut down all the major bus loop and all sorts of things. And no one received a trespass notice for that. So I'm not blocking anything. I'm not obstructing anything. I'm not stopping any functioning of the university. All I'm doing is providing a much needed corrective to the false information that has been perpetuated by these advocacy entities and by the anthropology and to some extent archaeology, although Andrew Martindale is in the Department of Anthropology. So it's really the Department of Anthropology that is on the hook for both the false information being put forward by Brian Whiting and Andrew Martindale. Anyway, so how was that? People let me know in the chat as to how did that go? Like, I know I'm not exactly proficient at the visuals, but it's good to have some of these clips. I'm not sure what the sound was like for the clips. The transitions back and forth were a little bit awkward. Anyway, I'm just trying to improve things as we go along. So, questions. If people have some questions, you can put them now in the chat. Sorry, I haven't been following. I'll just see if I can look at anything. Yesterday was even good from the sort of trolling that was going on, because this person was, constantly lambasting me for being a liar. And then, and even if I'm wrong, I'm not a liar, because I'm not intentionally trying to deceive people. And I don't think perhaps anyone else that's involved in all of this is intentionally trying to deceive. You suffer from misremembering, confirmation bias, and especially in these advocacy entities, they have this idea of a different conception of truth. That means that you can say anything, because that's just your truth. And if you're not kind of getting at the universal, the trying to understand things, then you can see how people are getting misled by a whole bunch of things going on. Anyway, so unfortunately, that troll is no longer here. But when I did ask her or him or it what the evidence was for the Kamloops case, this troll said witness testimony and archival records. And the archival records are all about the cemeteries. That's what the archival records are. There's no archival records which are saying, priest so-and-so, killed this person, and they got the 6-year-olds to get up and dig a grave for the person who was killed. You're not going to find that in archival records. That's going to be secretive acts that people are not going to be disclosing. So all the archival records are about which cemeteries people are buried in, the death certificates, the records of the authorities talking about various numbers of students. That's what you see there. Yes, I agree, Grandma. I miss Grandma Shingoose. I've got I do watch her TikTok videos. It's Grandma. Grandma's here. She pretends to be this kind and sweet old lady, just wants to help people. Well, that wasn't the grandma I met on September 26th, when Grandma was participating with 7 other thugs in trying to drag me off campus. Anyway, so yeah, 6-year-old, I've dug holes, not graves, but I've dug holes for things, and you'll see in the documentary that Simon Hergott and I are producing. Simon, incredible videographer. He's a genius. He probably gets mad at me for saying this over and over again, but he has got a visual artistic flair that's amazing. Anyway, a lot of what we're doing is kind of looking at this kind of stuff, and anyway, I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil the. But I learned a little bit about digging in this, which I knew before because I've dug things before. Anyway, so once again, so this is the UBC is part of the documentary as well. So we've got University of Winnipeg, which Daniel's on the call. Daniel nearly lost his life. I hope Daniel's recovered, that he's not suffering any nightmares from that situation. I was just dealing with the cry bullies. Maybe I should have been worried because they could have kicked me in the head, I guess. But no one did that. Anyway, we got some footage. Daniel got some footage from University of Winnipeg, University of Manitoba. Then we got Thompson Rivers University, which was another incredible experience. It was a triumph because they didn't arrest me. They let us just carry on. And I hope UBC is not going to see the need for a trespass notice or the removal. That would be ideal. And it would be ideal, too, if they gave some messaging to their community to say, you know, this is an important area of discussion and we're an academic institution. We need to have different points of view expressed to fully understand this area. So I'm hoping that's what's going to be the response. But, you know, it's up to UBC to respond. Anyway, but that's all going to be, whatever happens, it's going to be sort of the grand finale of all the things that have been occurring. And we can draw some conclusions from all these different universities, because that's what I find is so interesting. As I go into all these different universities, they all behave differently. They all have a different kind of character to them. And it's interesting to ask, you know, why do they act differently? Or perhaps it's just they're all talking to one another and wondering how to deal with this, what they, I'm sure, classify as some kind of threat, which is, you know, we've got our brand, and our brand is about truth, quote unquote truth, which is not truth. It is about, you know, relative truth. So therefore falsehoods can be perpetuated. And then what they call reconciliation, which is not about reconciliation at all, because it's about forcing people to accept falsehoods so that you can impose some kind of authoritarian agenda. Anyway, so these universities, I know that Universities Canada is the organization that where all the university presidents meet and have discussions, but I'm sure there's informal channels where they're wondering how do they deal with this, you know, this threat to their brand, their quote unquote truth and reconciliation brand. Anyway, so come out January 22nd, 11 o'clock Pacific, just for some conversation. See what you think about the claim about remains being confirmed at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and whether challenging the falsehood that there are remains at Kamloops, whether this constitutes denial. Is this denialism, and what is meant by denialism? Those kinds of discussions. I'm sure that, well, and for people listening who are in opposition to me, you know, what are you afraid of? If I'm so wrong, why do you need to prevent what I'm saying from being said? Wouldn't it be better to expose the falsehoods so that I can change my mind and I'm no longer going around talking about things that now have been shown to be untrue? I think we know the answer to that question. You don't care about the truth. You want to get something out of this falsehood, whatever it may be. It could even be psychological gratification, whatever it may be. But that's not academic. And I'm concerned about the universities. And we have to act now. We can't leave it any longer. This is, if we wait, they won't be universities anymore, and they might not even be universities now. But University of British Columbia, I'm sure there are serious academics in that institution. And so we're going to see. Okay. All right. So thanks a lot, everyone. I hope that was better the second time around. I don't know what happened the first time. Maybe it's just a whole bunch of people uploading to YouTube. And it might be the case, as people are saying, that academia is over, but that doesn't matter. You know, we have to document the destruction. You have to show people why this happened and how this happened. That's it. If it is true that it's over, we have to figure out how that happened and why that happened. And that's what, if at the very least, I'm hoping to add my ability to go in there and test these universities, because it is a test to contribute to a better understanding of the destruction of the Enlightenment, which is occurring all across the country, but it seems to be particularly bad in British Columbia. Thanks a lot for attending. I look forward to seeing you on January 22nd.